everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore coming at you from Breckenridge, Colorado. Today on Psychedelics Today, we have Lynn Marie Morski, host of the Plant Medicine podcast and founder of the Psychedelic Medicine Association. And we get into what both of those projects are. Lynn Marie, I think, has been on the show before. If not, sorry. I'm glad we got you on finally. And it's going to be pretty cool to see what develops here with the Psychedelic Medicine Association. Just happy that more people are working towards educating healthcare providers and insurance companies, all that kind of stuff. So really a fun podcast, and we had a great time chatting. And I think that's it for now. So thanks, Lynn Marie, for coming on. And I hope you all enjoy this episode and check out the Psychedelic Medicine Association. At the very least, we should be familiar with that organization and what they get into. So check it out and enjoy the show. If you want to support us, go over to psychedelicEducationCenter.com and check out some of our free classes. We also have some paid courses on there too. I've got some great shirts and mugs and stickers over at psychedelicstodayshop.com. And if you want to support us fiscally directly, we take donations at patreon.com/psychedelicstoday. So I think that's it for now. And we'll see you on the other side. Enjoy the episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Today we have Lynn Marie Morski, host of the Plant Medicine podcast and a new organization. I'm going to let you give us the name, Lynn Marie.
The Psychedelic Medicine Association.
All right. I remember we chatted about it, maybe a month or two ago. And I was really excited that you were going for it. And I'm excited to learn more about what's going on.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here and tell you and your listeners, especially because I think a lot of people who listen to your show will be interested in what we're doing and will be actually very important members of the association. And that will become evident as we talk about what goes on there.
Great. So let's just establish a little bit of your credentials. So you've got an MD and you're an attorney.
Yes.
I never got the chance to ask. Like, how does one do both of those? It's a great thing to have both. Very unique in the space too.
It is. Essentially, I was a multimedia designer before all that. And I went to medical school thinking I would like sports medicine because I'm a dancer and we could do dance medicine. And turns out I didn't love medicine. And so as soon as I got out of fellowship, I began looking at ways that I could use my medical degree, but not in the traditional sense. Like seeing a patient every 15 minutes. I mean, you've probably seen that the entire doctor industry is like, there's a physician suicide epidemic, there's a burnout epidemic. Like it's just wears on the doctors so much. And I saw that before I even got into it. And so I thought, well, I've always liked law because I had actually tutored people on how to take the LSAT years before. And I moved next to a law school and I said, okay, if I can get in here for free, because I was so in debt from med school, by the way, not in the past tense, but there's so much debt from medical school that I said, if I can get a full ride scholarship, I will go to this law school. And that's essentially how that happened. I went part-time while I was working at the VA as a doctor. And that's just how you do both. Like it's just, like anybody else who does a joint degree, sometimes there's joint degrees together, but I just did them kind of back to back-ish.
Yeah, fantastic. It's like amazing that you were able to do all that. And you were at the VA for like 15 years, is that right?
9 years. So I was in clinical medicine 14 years total, and 9 of that was at the VA doing compensation and pension exams. So for those who aren't familiar, as the servicemen and women are getting out, they see a doctor. The doctor does an exam and essentially has to put down every single thing that the veteran got in the military, at which point I was privy to all of the psychiatric diagnosis, all of the traumatic brain injury diagnosis. I would see what these men and women were going through in this exam. And as it will come into play later, we weren't allowed to treat or tell them anything. We were just kind of like record keepers, and then they would get money based on the exam we did. We weren't allowed to give them any advice. But as a Department of Defense employee, the other part of this was, even if I could have given advice, I was not allowed to talk about even CBD or cannabis. Definitely not allowed to talk about LSD, MDMA, ayahuasca. And so the
Mm.
more I got into that field, the more that being at the VA was really out of alignment because I knew what could help people and wasn't allowed to discuss it.
Yeah, that's got to feel awful to know that you could like give advice that could really help them and not go forward. I had this, I met a gentleman who was a VA psychiatrist somewhere. And at one point he would just like get up or multiple points actually, would get up, just close the door and say, if you ever say anything about this to anybody, I will tell everybody you're a liar and like blah, blah, blah. So, and then would lay out the whole thing about MDMA, ayahuasca, et cetera. It's
Right.
like pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think I remember Jonathan Lubecki's story, one of the people in the MDMA trials who was very public about
Mm.
his participation, but he went to the VA and at the end of his rope essentially, and somebody slid him a piece of paper, I think that said MAPS on it.
Ah,
Same thing is like people at the VA who know these things want to help, but we're so afraid of our, like job security. It should not be weighing job security versus saving veterans' lives. But that's really the position a lot of us are put in.
yeah.
And I couldn't take that anymore. And so I left the VA and made it my mission to undo the years of silence by speaking out a whole lot about it.
Yeah, and it's a great credential you carry too with having that much experience in the VA. So you can actually like speak to their frustrations, veterans' frustrations about the care they're getting. And that's amazing too.
It's been helpful, but it's been really nice because I can speak so easily with the vets doing work like Heroic Hearts or Veterans Exploring
Mhm.
Treatment Solutions, like all those vet organizations that are trying to get veterans into psychedelic treatment. Like I really, in a way that I don't think I would be able to otherwise because I never served. I mean, my brother's in the Army currently, but if you have not had that kind of firsthand experience or at least quasi secondhand experience of hearing these stories day after day, it's really hard to understand what they go through and how much they could really benefit from these.
Right, absolutely. Cool. So let's dig into this project. So you are now creating a organization primarily for physicians, right? To help provide information and support,
Yes,
education, and yeah. Can you talk a little bit about it?
absolutely. So when I first left the VA, and like I said, I made it my mission to spread this information to my colleagues because I knew, I would casually talk to my colleagues at the VA. They didn't know anything about psychedelic medicine. And then I would speak with other physician colleagues at conferences and, just people in family medicine, internal medicine, et cetera. Like maybe there would be a psychiatrist here or there who knew that ketamine was a thing, but nobody would admit to knowing anything about MDMA or psilocybin, and most of the primary care people didn't even know ketamine. And I thought, oh my goodness, how do we fix this? Because, like a lot of people have said, is FDA approval, for example, of MDMA or psilocybin is just step one. What do you do when you've got a medicine now approved that doctors are afraid to recommend or prescribe because it
Yeah.
came out of nowhere? They're like, whoa, psychedelics were Schedule 1 and extremely dangerous and don't do drugs. And now I'm supposed to be giving it to a patient. Like that is a barrier, right? And I thought like, and ketamine is available now and it's a lifesaver that's available now, especially for suicidality. And so the goal was that I started by doing with the plant medicine podcast was to educate doctors. Now it was a little short-sighted of me because it had not occurred to me since I had not practiced traditional medicine in so long that your average doctor does not get their medical information from a podcast. They get like lifestyle information from a podcast. They get how to get out
Mhm.
of medicine information from podcasts, but they're not getting the like, oh, okay, so this medicine does this thing. They get that from emails. And so
Mhm.
after about 6 months of doing the plant medicine podcast and getting, great feedback, but it was always from non-doctors, patients loved it or prospective patients. I was like, okay, how do I get this truly to the people who need it in a format that they can digest? Because doctors don't have an hour to listen to a podcast. They have 10 minutes between each patient to maybe look at one study or one email or two emails that come through. And so that's when I decided to make an association because with medical associations, you sign up, you pay your, yearly fee, and then generally you get a newsletter or something every month that gives you the latest in whatever that area is. And so that was the very like basic start of the association. I thought if I can just get doctors together and then I'll send them the information once a month on the latest in psychedelic science. Now it has expanded kind of greatly from there. in its scope, but that was the initial mission. And the expansion was that I had some people from Europe who were on the Conscious Fund. They had come to me and they said, we want to make some psychedelic continuing medical education. And then they found out I was wanting to do the association. They said, here, take a CTO. We'll give you our Rolodex, like, to support you doing this. They said, but we recommend that you make this a bigger organization, because it's not just the practitioners speaking amongst themselves. We need to make this a bigger conversation. Like, how do we get insurance to cover this? How do we get, more research sites for things that need to happen? They said, bring in the other organizations. And so the association now has practitioner members of many different varieties. So you don't have to be a doctor. Anybody who is seeing patients on the front line. If a patient comes to you as the first person they see, or maybe second person they see, you can be a nurse practitioner, PA, therapist, anything where you are responsible for a patient's mental health. And this is not for those who already know about it. This is, like I said, to educate those who have no idea. However, like with your audience, we would love those who already are working in the field and who do know about it to join as well, because we're going to have forums where the practitioners can speak with each other. And it's really helpful if those who are new to the field, just learning, see that there are people working in the field and they can have that dialogue, and education can take place in that way as well. But so we're having the practitioners as one member, and then there's organizations as another, and there are corporate members too, because we want there to be a dialogue between those, for example, setting up ketamine clinics, and the doctors who are going to recommend ketamine. Because if doctors are thinking like, I don't know these clinics, I don't know that I feel okay sending them to a ketamine clinic. We'd like the ketamine clinic people to be in there so that they can have that conversation and ask their questions so that they can feel comfortable recommending and prescribing these medicines.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm glad you have such a broad scope. Really helpful, I think.
Thank you. I have to admit, like, it was a little out of my comfort zone, because I was just like, okay, we're gonna be doctors talking to doctors, but the picture is so much bigger, because if the psychedelic medicine comes out and the patient says, well, my insurance doesn't cover it, like, oh, that's right, we have to have the insurance piece, and oh, if I mention this to my doctor, I might lose my benefits. Oh, we need to get that covered. Like, this is such a huge conversation, and we need a lot of players, but at the center are the people that are going to be prescribing it. And very often, if you want to lobby for some kind of change in insurance, it helps to have a group of doctors come lobby with you and support you in that. And that's what we're providing to these organizations. Like, once you help us educate these doctors, the doctors will be on your side and help advocate for their patients in return.
Yeah, absolutely. So like, one thing's coming to mind is like, this is interesting and worth chatting about. Like, obviously a big portion of what we do here is education, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, why would Joe be willing to talk about other people doing education? And the real answer is that we need a very big ecosystem of educators out there. It is not like enough for one school to own it, right? Like MAPS or Compass, whoever can't just like own this education piece. This needs to be really big and really amplified and soon.
Yeah. And like, we want everybody to come in there who has their different, because, so many of so there's two levels of education. There's we're CIIS and MAPS, and we're going to train you to be a therapist. That's one level. And there still needs to be more of those, right? Like, we can't have everybody going to those two programs. But then there's also, like, for example, you guys have really interesting courses, like your shadow course or the spiritual emergency versus spiritual emergence course. Like, I mean, that's
not beginner stuff either.
Exactly.
Right?
But like, I want that to be available for people that are interested in this, because, I think, and frankly, that spiritual emergence versus emergency course is one that I mentioned to so many people, because if you've never been to a ceremony where something went wrong, it's all hearts and flowers. And you may think, I can just administer this medicine. And I want everybody who thinks about administering a medicine to take that course to know what happens when things go a little bit awry. And so, I want these doctors to have a look at all sides of it, like, here, this is how things go well, but also this is the other thing you might see in an emergency room. If you see somebody, it's good for emergency room doctors to know what they may be seeing, right? On the other end, if that spiritual emergency ends up needing medical attention, so that they're educated on what the people might have taken and what may be going on with them psychologically. So I really appreciate that you have that, like, all hands on deck attitude, because everybody brings a little bit different piece to this education puzzle. And I really love the piece that you guys bring.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And that class is free, the spiritual emergence
Oh,
or psychosis course. So
nice. Oh yeah, I was
please jump in there.
sorry, I was
Folks.
mistitling it the whole time, but now that I know it's free,
Yeah,
hey everybody,
whatever.
take that course.
Mm. Yeah. Like it's, the public number is 22 veteran suicides daily. That is just a fraction of total suicides daily in the United States. And that number 22 a day is probably not properly accounting for all of the deaths. I think it's probably a much bigger number, and it's just not okay. And that's why we have such a big push here. Like we need everybody to start going at it. Like I want to criticize a lot of these for-profit groups, but I don't criticize them fully because I know that we need their capital to get through the FDA. So this stuff can really help a lot of people.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think we all in this industry have that kind of struggle back and forth. And the grassroots part of my heart was like, no, keep corporations out of this association. But the reality is, if we bring them in, and they have to be approved to come in, not anybody can come in.
Mm-hmm.
But then, for example, we at the association we are following the North Star guidelines, and
Great.
it's a way that we can ensure, or not, well, ensure is a strong word, that we can try to peer pressure these for-profit companies into behaving along with the guidelines. Like if you're going to have access to all of our physicians, you can't be doing A, B, and C that are way outside of the guidelines. And so these for-profit companies are going to do what they're going to do regardless if you interact with them. Better to interact with them to keep that conversation going so that what they are doing is more in line with the principles of the community.
That's really important. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm glad you're taking that approach. And I think that's one of the better things about the North Star Pledge is that it's kind of transferable. Like you can say, hey, we're doing this. Maybe you should if you want to be allowed in. And yeah, it's just a great way to say, hey, we've got a lot of great things happening. We'd love for you to be a part of it, but there's some rules. It's kind of like Burning Man. Like, that there's ethics going in.
Right.
And you're like, I guess I can not try to sell anything for a week or whatever.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think you and I have had many discussions offline about like the amount of kind of infighting or cancel culture or whatever. And it's like, if we all live by we all want the same thing. Not everybody,
Yeah.
we have this discussion. Yes, at Horizon, I was like, not everybody here is on the same page. Well, in the small community I'm trying to form here of medicalization, we want the same thing, which is care for patients. Like that's our basic goal, is to be doing the best for our patients. And that means knowing the most about what treatments are out there. Like right now, the average American I say American, the average doctor probably worldwide has no idea that ketamine can be life-saving for somebody with suicidal ideation. That is a disservice to everybody who is having a suicidal ideation. Just today on Tim Ferriss's podcast, I heard him mention that. And essentially he was saying like antidepressants take a while to ramp up. If you don't have a while, like if you are thinking of ending it now, please investigate ketamine. And that was like the most helpful thing he could have said. But man, he needs to say that to doctors who are the ones seeing patients for suicidality. And so I just want to get as many people together and be as transparent as we can so that this, the arguing it just dies down and we can all focus on what's important, which is getting these medicines and saving lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in the long run too, it's going to be interesting when we have won that battle, which might be a little while. And then, what's next after we've been able to integrate medicine? This is probably going to be a 20-year plus project, but, like betterment of the well,
Exactly.
allowing religious use and like having doctors be able to speak to, no, it's probably not safe for you to do that. Or, okay, yeah, you've passed, you're allowed to do ketamine. Like, you've got the MDMA health stamp, or your heart's a little tricky. Maybe you should not do that.
Right. Like getting these things into FDA approved situations or wide use is overcoming not only just the stigma of they're illegal essential, but as you know, like one person jumps out of the window on LSD and it's dangerous. So if one person falls off a cliff because they wandered off during ayahuasca, you Google ayahuasca and the death comes up. Like this is what we need to avoid. We need more safe use of these and fewer like random catastrophic things to draw attention. And so that's why it's really important what you just said is like, think about the, okay, ibogaine is dangerous because there can be deaths. Yes, if they're not properly medically screened. And well, it's really hard to do proper medical screens if there are very few doctors who know what they're screening for because they don't know what ibogaine is, right? Like this is where it comes
Mm-hmm.
back to get these widely accepted, we have to have widely accepted guidelines for, like you said, you qualify to do MDMA. You are healthy enough. Like your average doctor right now is not able to make that distinction because they don't know what MDMA does to a body physiologically. So like this, that's all, those are huge parts of this movement, is just educating on the actual physiologic things that can happen, which can you and which can't you take with which medicines. Example, like so many people are on antidepressants. Well, you can't just take ayahuasca on any antidepressant. Like these are just such basic medical things that we really need to be taught in medical school, but it's going to be a long time before that happens. So that's part of our mission, is to fill in that gap.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So like doctors, it's kind of hard for a non-medical person to understand like the pressures that physicians are under. Like we get a lot better view into like what a nurse's day is like.
Right.
So we get to hear all the complaints about doctors.
So true.
But a doctor is under so much pressure. Like they're tight schedules, like insurance companies pretty much driving it.
Yes.
It's kind of a really crazy situation.
Yeah.
Any comments on how crazy the day can be?
Well, I'm really appreciative that you bring this up because it it opens the door for a conversation that needs to be had, which is like the fact that your doctor does not currently know about psychedelics does not make that man or woman a bad person. They simply don't know. And then secondarily, if you bring up psychedelics to them, let me tell you what goes on in a doctor's head who has never heard anything about psychedelics, right? The first thing that, and at least for American doctors, the majority of American doctors, and I bet most of them would agree with me, is one of the first thing that like peaks up if you hear somebody mentioning, I'm going to do an illegal substance, is our fear of malpractice steps in. And there is no way that we are going to feel comfortable having this discussion with you in any way that says it's okay, because the US medical system is so litigious, right? Like you can get sued for everything. And so, and when you get sued, like that stays on your record forever and you could lose your license or just the amount of legal fees to protect yourself. And so most doctors have to practice conservatively. And like you said, they may say that thing, like you said, or going to close the door and say, I never said this to you. Like they want to get the information out to you. But if they don't have a full breadth of information, if there are holes in their knowledge, for example, like say they've heard of ayahuasca, maybe they saw something on 60 Minutes about psilocybin, but they don't know the interactions with medicines. They don't know what kind of heart conditions can and can't have it. They may err on the side of saying, I can't recommend that for you. And then that patient doesn't benefit from it, but it's not because the doctor is trying to be evil or because there's an East versus West. Like, unfortunately, that we're so kind of into putting everybody in two camps these days. There's been a lot of vilification of doctors, and like you just illustrated, and I appreciate that very much. Most of what is vilified is not that doctor's fault. They didn't try to make a 15-minute slot with you. If they could have an hour with you, they'd probably take it. But the insurance companies or whoever is employing them said, nope, we've got to have you seeing somebody every 15 minutes or we don't make money. And trust me, also the doctors aren't getting paid more for giving you prescription medicines. That's another total it's like, no, that's like that's never happened in any of the places I've worked. If it happens somewhere, that has got to be exception to the rule. Like they're not getting paid more by this drug company. Their salary doesn't go up because they gave you this medicine. They want to, and by the way, there's always bad actors. So let me just say, I'm speaking for the heart of the good doctors out there. Is like, they want you to have the best medicine possible. Like when I was prescribing, if there was a generic out there that I knew was going to save you money, I'm giving you the generic. I don't care what, drug rep gave me a purple pill pen the day before. Like, I know who I am as a patient. I don't want to be taking the expensive medicine for no reason. I'm not going to prescribe it. And so like there's all these thoughts about what doctors are. And I would just invite people to like have a little bit of empathy that, like you said, the system is dictating a lot of those actions, and the litigious nature is dictating a lot of the conversation that's going to be had around psychedelics. And that's part of what we want to educate the doctors about. We're going to have lawyers in the association come in and do like I just spoke with our buddy Sean. He helped me on learning how doctors can safely, within the guidelines of malpractice, have these conversations with patients and keep themselves out of legal trouble.
So important. So important. And that would be really cool to just go, okay, I want to do this. I have all this, quote unquote ammunition that I can pass off to my MD and have him check out or her check out and then see if I'm a good fit, if my heart or whatever is well enough to go on this mushroom retreat or whatever it is. I don't know if I chatted with you about this, but for our mushroom facilitation clients last summer, I had them get with their GP and their psychiatrists to get a general thumbs up. It was really funny to see the way in which they couched their language. It was
do tell.
Things like, oh, I think this patient is healthy enough for this overnight camp or something funny like that, and they're like 60. That's like, oh my goodness.
Really funny. Now, how did you find GPs and psychiatrists who were familiar
Well, it was
enough?
theirs. It was their primary GP and their psychiatrist.
And how did they educate that doctor on what psilocybin was? Like, it's not a default that the doctor's going to know.
Right. How did that work? I don't actually know. I believe they might have referenced the Hopkins study. Say, hey, here's what's going on. They're doing end of life stuff. So it's healthy. It's safe enough for people who are dying. So perhaps it's safe enough for me.
Yeah.
I think they were doing something like that. And, it's psilocybin. So it's one of the safer ones.
I like that. It's safe enough for those who are dying. It's safe enough. Those might actually be two different. but yeah. And that's why, I asked the question because that's one of the things we want to give to our members is like a cheat sheet, like just the very basics. Here's psilocybin. Here are the contraindications, like, schizophrenia, or you're on this medication, so it won't really have its effect, just like basic contraindications so that you can do the reverse, which is essentially have your doctor say like, well, you don't have any of these contraindications. Yes, you are cleared for your quote unquote overnight camping trip.
Right. Because they have to figure out how best to couch it. So their insurance company or their licensing board can't really go crazy on them. Right.
Right. And that's, you just keep pointing out like issue after issue that we have to address to get this widely medicalized or available is like, yep, we have to be able to say these illegal at this point substances in our notes. And frankly, like at the point where say, psilocybin is legal in other countries, if a patient goes and does it in another country and they come back here, they should be able to say, I did psilocybin without getting their benefits yanked because they're using a Schedule I drug. Like they weren't breaking the law in the country they went to. There is no inherent danger in that drug. In fact, very beneficial. Like there have to be so many things in the entire system that need to change for patients to be able to have the full amount of openness with their doctor, because it's really a disservice to any patient to hold anything back from their doctor. And at this point, they're really having to, like you said, couch things in different terms, et cetera. And so these are all parts that we eventually want to address.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like I don't know if it's obvious or not, but I used to do a real lot of drugs. And I would be even embarrassed. Like the last time I went to the guy who I thought was going to be my GP for a while, he's a PA. I thought he was going to be like my guy. Yeah. And the shame he gave me for eating cannabis edibles to help with sleep was unbelievable. Wow. It was the last time I'll see that person as my doctor or whatever. And it was just crazy to me. I'm like,
it's so sad.
Good Lord.
It's essentially like essentially that statement is a billboard to you and all the other patients that says, I've chosen to learn nothing since graduating from medical school or PA school, right? Because like the information on cannabis is widely available. Psychedelics is maybe a little harder to find, but cannabis, come on, like it just to make that statement. And I often say that if you go to a doctor and they can't have this conversation with you about cannabis or psychedelics, please find another doctor. But then, luckily, this is where I appreciate having other people call me out, is that, that's a very privileged statement to make. Not everybody can choose a doctor. If you're on Medicaid or something and they give you a doctor and you have one choice and that doctor is has one mindset from an old school day and has not chosen to learn anything new, then that patient's in a real dire situation, which is why we really, we need to spread this information far and wide so it, isn't just another bastion of the rich elites that get to go to their doctors and be open about it, so that everybody can.
Yeah. It's wild to me. And, I'm, thankfully in a really great position where I'm actually friends with tons of doctors now. And I'm able to even just run questions by folks. And it's really, really helpful. But, the fact that this person, it has zero context for cannabis is insane to me, especially living in a ski town in Colorado. That's the craziest part.
Right.
It's 95% of your clients are going to be pot smokers and you're going to know nothing about it. That's an incredible disservice. It's half your people are on Lipitor and you're not going to read a paper on Lipitor.
Exactly what
Good
that
Lord.
analogy should be, because they're actually, Lipitor is probably less common than cannabis in their, in their demographic. And
Absolutely.
it's how do you keep your eyes closed to what's going on? It's just, and like you said, doctors do not have a ton of time, but there's a bare minimum that you need to keep up with. And you live in a state where it's legal. Please get yourself. And that's the thing is, there are societies for cannabis clinicians. There are societies for, there's societies where doctors can learn about cannabis. In fact, the Journal of the American Medical Association, or one of these hardcore doctor things, they put out a course I could have taken for CME on cannabis. We have to take continuing medical education every year or 2 years. If you're practicing in that state, you need to use your CME courses on cannabis. This is a no-brainer. And that's part of what we're doing, on Psychedelic Medicine Association.org. If you don't even join as a member, before you even go into the membership, we have a courses tab, and we've got all those courses. We've got your courses there. We've got other courses that, that you please spend your continuing medical education or continuing education dollars or credits or whatever on something new that is really going to change lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So, shifting gears slightly, earlier you said the Conscious Fund was helping you out a little bit. They gave you a technical person. And could you give us a little bit of an idea what is the Conscious Fund?
They are a fund out of London and Malta that came from cannabis.
Malta.
And Malta. I know, places I've never been, but they've been working a lot with Rick Doblin and some other people on high level things in the psychedelics world. And they're just two gentlemen there that I work with, but they saw that same need. They're how do we get, because they're talking with people in these different industries that have all come to the same conclusion, which is how do we get doctors to know more about this? Because otherwise, what do we do? Now there's 10 different psychedelic medicines that doctors are still not prescribing, and so that's what led them to reach out to me and start working on some education, and then that led us to start the fund. And they're essentially I make no qualms about the fact that I did medical school and I did law school. I have not done business school. And so essentially they're like my business dads. They help me, because they're called the fund, but they didn't, they don't fund us with finances. They fund us with help, essentially. Okay, how do I write a press release and this kind of thing? And they said, here, you can have our CTO. He can help you start the website and get, we made ourselves a public benefit corp and those kinds of things. Just they've helped fill in the gaps on business knowledge that I think have made this from what would have been 2 years for me to launch to more like 6 months, maybe even less for launch. And so I'm grateful that they came along, and I see their heart. They really want these medicines to get out to people. And I'm just glad that somehow LinkedIn brought us together.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I would hope that we helped a little bit getting you some press, but you never know.
You definitely have helped significantly.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. I have to just say this. I'm going to, plug your show on your show, but but I mean, just the gratitude I have for you and Kyle and the connections that I would say the same thing. The amount of time it would have taken for the Plant Medicine podcast to get the level of guests I got was cut in, a quarter when I met you two at Horizons. So I'm just eternally grateful for all the help you've given me over the year. I say over the year. It's been like a year.
Well, that's excellent. Yeah. And I'm glad. I'm just happy to see how it's played out. So yeah, on their website, looks like they've are involved with this group Hive, Microdose. Microdose is getting a lot of play.
Yeah,
They've got a
Hive
lot
is
of
that's
psychedelic
the thing in
industry
Malta that
opportunities. Hive is
I
Malta.
certainly hope to visit at some point. Yeah, I think like they're just kind of like an entire wellness something center, like involving psychedelics.
There's like minimal info on their site. Malta is an interesting country. It's like highly independent. I don't know. So my mind immediately goes, is that an extradition country? Can you just like hide out there when you get in trouble? It's like, I don't think that is.
Not that I know of. They have long-standing histories in these countries, so I don't think they were extradited to them.
Now it looks like there is an extradition treaty there. It's in my mind, it's one of those countries, kind of like Switzerland. It's like kind of like a tax haven of sorts. So there might be some interesting ways to like, because it's such a small country, leverage like science and investment dollars to help with this kind of stuff, like get more centers open and all that kind of stuff. And not to mention it being a beautiful thing in the Mediterranean, beautiful island country.
Right. I think that the center that, as I understand it, and again, I was just digging through their website because we've been focused very much on the Medicine Association, so I don't have a lot of time to be like, tell me all about Hive. But in a country that has different regulations than other, it sounds like a place that more progressive things could happen.
Yeah, totally. And it looks like it's not really far off the coast of Sicily. And so it's like just really in an interesting geography and location there. I can't wait to go. I hope I get to go to Malta.
Yeah, I'm inviting you on our first Hive field trip visit. Like when we take a field trip to Hive, let's go.
All right, I'm in. I'm excited.
Come on, COVID.
Sounds great.
Go away. Let's do this.
Yeah, wrap this stuff up. And I can't wait.
Because I think you and I were both supposed to be at ICPR, and we missed that.
My God, I was going to do like 2 months in Europe.
Me too. Me too.
A lot of work. It was going to be amazing. But now this thing's here.
I know.
So here, let's get sidetracked on COVID for just a brief minute. I'm friendly with a lot of doctors who've seen a lot of people die and get really sick. And it's just not even necessarily the death that's the worst part.
Right.
It's like the injuries. And like, I just saw something horrific about an increase in stillbirths with COVID. Yeah. Like a drastic increase, which is pretty horrifying. And there's people that are trying to do like in-person conferences, and ayahuasca retreats are popping back up. And it's just, I don't know that it's the right time. I don't think, like, it's really hard to contextualize how dangerous this thing is because we still have a lot to learn.
Yeah.
And it's not the flu. It's, the flu's still pretty bad, but this is like something we just don't know anything about. Have you seen anything like that? Have you noticed anything going on in the psychedelic space around COVID?
I have seen things go online that were not, I think, even conceived of online before. I have yet to hear of things opening up. You have clearly heard, or I've seen them advertise that they're in the future opening up. But like with almost anything that says that, until people actually get on the plane and make it happen, because I've seen conferences canceled up until like the week before.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I hope that everybody keeps that kind of like, that mindset that psychedelics gives us, that we're all connected, because this is like the legitimate, we're all connected. You never know what sneeze you have that you think is allergies that can give COVID to somebody's, grandma who gives it to the person who's going to give birth. Like, it's just really, like you said, there are too many unknowns. Until we have, there's this 5-minute rapid testing that's supposed to be coming out soon. Like, okay, when that's here, great. Like the landscape can look vastly different. You can test everybody going into every event at any point. Perfect. It's close to perfect, because if you do it within like the first day or two after exposure, it may not be positive, but it's darn close to as perfect as we're going to get. But this is really one of those times where we have to think of everybody as an ecosystem. I mean, right now, comically, the ecosystem that was doing better is the one outside of us. Like the environment was taking a breath for a while, but then, we lit it on fire somehow recently. So we're all struggling, and we just need to have a little patience and empathy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough. Like, I think a lot of folks right now, there's downtime. So people are reading and listening to, some folks are listening to more podcasts. And I think the numbers are really going down for us because people aren't commuting as much.
Right.
But it's interesting to see more and more people come into the space during COVID and say, all right, I want this experience. They're like, I want it now during COVID. I'm like, oh, I don't know what to tell you, sir. Um,
Yeah, that isn't that the big question. I did an episode with
mm,
Rebecca from Plant Parenthood on that because she
mhm,
had discussed it on her Instagram, and I thought she had some good points. But it's really, one of the things that's gone online that I think has surprised many people is like, here, you take your ketamine lozenge at home, and then we'll do this via Skype, and that's an interesting development. And at least you've got a
mhm,
person there. But to do these full on journeys on your own, like that's, I just don't think you can Skype or Zoom that nearly as effectively, especially like in those emergency situations where we're talking about. If that person is not within very quick driving distance of getting to you, it just is a concern for me. And yeah,
mm,
that is a situation. Like it's very easy to see why people would want to do more. Like it's if you're stuck at home, like let's use this time for introspection. Or if this COVID is bringing up a lot of some trauma or a lot of anxieties, then can we look to these medicines? But I saw a picture of Veronica Gold on Facebook the other day, and she was going in to treat a patient with ketamine. She's got her full face shield on, and I was like,
mm,
that it's great that there are still those options out there, the safe options. Providers doing what they can to try to get these modalities to patients, but with the ceremonies that are now not happening, and then everybody goes into their own homes and tries to do it in their own home, maybe by themselves, maybe with a less
mm,
qualified trip sitter because that's who happened to be close and didn't mind getting within 6 feet of you. Like, yeah, it's something that I just kind of a general. I like you. I think I feel the same as you. Is like, let's caution everybody on the potentials, because what happens when you're alone and you do get in the situation where you need to call emergency care? Like, you don't want to call 911. This is not the situation you want to be calling 911, and that's going to be really traumatic when you're already in a sensitive mind space. So yeah, there's no great guideline on that. I think it's just please employ as much caution as you can.
mm. Yeah, please, please, please. We want this thing to go away, and it requires a lot of people being really cautious.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's the hand we've been dealt.
But is
Um,
there also maybe like the silver lining, which is that
mm,
this has, like you said, we've known about the 22 veteran suicides, and somehow still things haven't gotten done in mental health.
mhm,
Maybe because, again, that's other, right? We have this whole issue with others, right? Like that's happening to these other people over here. The pandemic is one of the first things in ever that has happened to everybody. Like it's not like, oh, only the poor get this. Nope. Poor and rich. Tom Hanks got it right off the bat. Like everybody's getting it. Prime ministers get it. And a lot of people are suffering the same mental health issues from the quarantine. And so it's not it's no longer where we can say, oh, mental health struggles are for others. This has hit everybody. And so, will this silver lining be that now there's more, post COVID, we're seeing so much, the suicide rate is rising for everybody, mental health
mm,
issues are rising for everybody. Is this the tipping point where the mental health system looks around and says, okay, our tools aren't sufficient? Can we start looking at these other modalities, including psychedelics, because we've got a second epidemic on our hands here?
yeah, mhm. Yeah. I would love for that to be true. I
Right.
hope so.
I can
Um,
only hope, right? Like, at this point,
yeah.
which I'm going to put out the manifest that whatever hippie business I need to conjure up for this
Uh-huh.
to happen.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm seeing some increased activity in the mental health nonprofits around me, and I imagine that's happening everywhere. So, I hope things move. I hope funding can get shifted around a little bit, and mental health can get the attention it needs. And, as a result, more attention on psychedelics.
Yeah.
'Cause, like as much as I would love to see like psychedelics a lot more available tomorrow on the market, like there's just so much more preparation and groundwork that needs to be done
Yeah.
for us to be able to handle it. There needs to be so many more organizations.
Totally.
Yeah, like in the hundreds, maybe thousands of organizations playing in the sandbox.
In the sandbox,
Then we could
right.
probably handle it. But
Right, right. But, and I'm hoping that this kind of COVID weird downtime, like, you know, can I say that I would have gotten the Psychedelic Medicine Association out so quickly if there weren't a pandemic that said, okay, you have to sit here and there's barely anything else you can do. Like it kind of gave us all focus time. And I'm hoping that, that led to some other organizations popping up because it's definitely a time that it's necessary. And like you said, there's so like, it's not just once we've got approval, there's so many other things that need to be taken care of. Because like you
Mm.
said, even if it was like Lipitor and Lipitor gets approved tomorrow, doctors can just hand it out. No way that's even close. Like not only do we have to tell doctors that this our version of Lipitor exists, get them to believe it, get them to feel safe, but then also it's not like you just give them the medicine. Like it
Yeah.
comes with the psychotherapy and the integration and all those other pieces. So you're right. There's just a lot of hands that need to go into this.
Hmm. Absolutely. So, are you planning on any kind of physical events in the future or events for the organization?
Yeah, so for people who are members, that's one of the benefits for being like an organizational or corporate member is you get to put on webinars to the members of whatever your specific thing is. So Unlimited Sciences, for
Mm.
example, they've got the study out with Johns Hopkins right now on psilocybin. If they want to do a like, hey, here's our study on psilocybin, and here's a good way to talk to your patients about psilocybin if you think they're going to do it, or if Johns Hopkins wants to come on and do something on psilocybin for end of life anxiety, or one of the law firms wants to come on and tell doctors, here's some great guidelines for talking to your patients and not coming afoul of malpractice laws. Like we want them to contribute to the organization and help in whatever way that they see fit. So we're going to educate with our newsletter and our handouts on, like I said, our cheat sheets on maybe contraindications, et cetera. But these founding members are really important in dictating, what kind of webinars. We'll put on some webinars ourselves as well. But in the future, I definitely hope to have an in-person conference because as I was speaking with the medical director of Field Trip, and he had said, it's really a safety and numbers thing. Like doctors are, we're already afraid of litigation, but if we think there are a ton of other doctors out there that are first off working in this field, and then secondly, that are learning about this and that are also going to be talking to their patients about psychedelics, and they see that there are these other organizations that are in the milieu, especially like when you go to a conference. Like it's one thing to see them in a forum, but it's a whole nother thing to be in person and realize like this is a thing. These are people, there are plenty of people wearing business suits doing this, like it's not just a bunch of dreadlock hippies, like look in person, like this is a legitimate sector of science. And I think that's going to help doctors feel more and more comfortable having these conversations with their patients.
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah. So that Psychedelic Science 2017 event where it seemed like many thousands of people there. I don't know what the total number was. Like that was probably a really big event to move the needle, but we just need a lot more of those. Like, how do we get 20% of doctors in the US to one of these events?
Yeah. Well,
Doesn't have to be enormous, right? It just needs to be themed this way.
right. And so like the tagline that we have on our website at this point says, have your patients started asking us about psychedelics.
Mm, hmm.
Right? Because if I were practicing and somebody said that to me, I would be like, oh, there's a whole nother field of things I need to know about that, like first off, n- just asking that question doesn't tell you how helpful there are, but the fact that patients are going to come start asking will hopefully lead them to realize, no, this is a thing that's happening. And then they realize how helpful they are. And then we've impressed on them that it's actually going to be within your practice guidelines too. Like you said, like the ludicrous nature of being a doctor or a PA in Colorado and not knowing anything about cannabis. That's essentially what I want it to be like in the US. Like it should be absolutely crucial for anybody on the front lines of patient care to know at least the basics of these medicines. Like, we're not trying to get doctors to all want to do psychedelic medicine at all. Like, that's not our goal. If people learn about it and get excited and want to get trained and do that, fantastic. But we just want a basic level of knowledge. And like you said, if just 20% of doctors knew, that would be great. And then those doctors, can talk to their colleagues in other areas. But yeah, that's essentially the way that we're impressing it on people is like, this is coming. You as a professional responsible for other people's health need to educate yourself on this.
Mm, yeah. I've got a friend who's a not hospice, sorry, palliative care doc. And, this work could be a really great thing to recommend if and when it's legal to her clients, patients. And the question came up like, what am I supposed to like give them MDMA and just be there? It's like, no, like it's a lack of understanding of the context of how this would be administered. It's like a really big deal. And
Totally.
they want to think it's just like, I hate to keep beating up on Lipitor, but just like the Lipitor thing, like, here you go, here's your bottle of drugs and go home. It's like, no, it's a very different model. And
Right.
it's kind of hard to communicate.
It really is. It's essentially like, I remember the old electric shock therapy, which I think is called ECT. But like, if
ECT,
you,
yeah.
yeah, like just to know about it didn't mean you were ever going to administer it. Like you referred to somebody else to do this thing, and that's like you said, that's part of the fear is just having zero idea. Number one, how it happens, and number two, who can do it for them. So if you recommend, not recommend. Okay, say your patient comes to you and you want to be fully giving them all the options for their trauma. Let's say they want to address their trauma and you want to tell them about ayahuasca, but you have no great idea about what resort center or ceremony center or private person is safe and well trained
Hmm.
in trauma, then you're going to feel really shaky about making that recommendation. And that's really where we are. I mean, ayahuasca is a big one because, like, that is a major hit you over the head psychedelic. It can do so much good and so much damage if not done properly. That, like, same thing with, I mean, just look at CBD. If you're a doctor thinking about telling your patient about CBD, but you know that they could accidentally go to the gas station and get that CBD and have absolutely nothing good and maybe bad things happen, you're going to be really
Yeah.
afraid to recommend CBD. And this is CBD with on steroids, obviously. Like this is a whole other ball game. And so
Yeah.
it's really like, one of those steps, like you said, is the doctors are not going to feel comfortable recommending if they don't know where they're sending their people to. And that's essentially why I wanted people like the heads of ketamine centers to be in the association so that they can have these conversations like, okay, the doctor asks, ketamine center, what kind of screening do you do? Who's there with the
Hmm.
patient? What kind of mental health help are they getting before and after? Like, that's the kind of conversation that needs to happen so that a doctor says, hey, that totally checks out. I now feel comfortable sending my people to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's super important. Um, and I would, yeah, love to see that play out that way. And I'm really happy that you're in the mix and you've got the experience working in a clinical setting. You've got the, backing of an organization to really help you move this thing forward. And it's awesome. And I'm just happy to see it. And I'm happy it's you.
Why,
So
thank you, Joe. That is,
yeah.
that's quite the compliment. I always say like it was kind of hard to find, everybody wants to work in something that's their flow state, right? Like close to
Yeah.
their zone of genius. And like practicing medicine wasn't mine and practicing law
Hmm.
wasn't mine. But communicating about those two areas is where I feel very comfortable. And that's where this has all come together. And so I'm just grateful that whatever twists and turns of life have brought me to this place. Like you said, not many people do the medicine and law thing. And at the time, anybody was like, why would you do that? And now it seems to all make sense. Like, this is a place where I get to use both of those. And hopefully, like, I'm also the poster child for the person that I am preaching to in this association because I'm from the Midwest, grew up in a conservative
Hmm.
household, did not touch cannabis until I was 35, still not my medicine, didn't do a psychedelic until I was 35. Like I was late to all the
Hmm.
parties and learning about the science, my mind was changed. And I clearly very drastically. And so I know it's possible, but I also know what it takes to get somebody's mind to change, Michael Pollan style. So I hope that other people see the value in this association and share this information with their friends, your friends who aren't in psychedelics, but your friends who might be doctors, or maybe your doctor. If like you go to your doctor and they don't know about psychedelics, like please pass along this information because we want to increase education so we can get these medicines out to the people who need them and so that we can make sure that this whole movement moves forward safely.
Hmm. Absolutely. So you're accepting applications and new members now?
Yeah, so if you go to psychedelicmedicineassociation.org, you can put in your email, and then when we launch on the 29th, we will send you all a membership packets kind of thing where you can sign up officially. Also, we're going to have a launch webinar on the 29th where I'm going to have a panel and we're going to be discussing different different ways to bridge this gap between the psychedelic science world and some of the things we talked about today, some of the concerns that need to be addressed in getting this to be more comfortable on the mouths of physicians when they're talking to patients.
Yeah. Interesting. That's great.
Oh yeah, and if you want to come to the webinar, also go to psychedelicmedicinеassociation.org, and there will be somewhere you can just sign up for the webinar if you aren't necessarily interested in being in an association but want to hear a little bit more about this topic. And like I said, if you go to that same website without even being a member, you can go to the courses tab. You can find Psychedelics Today courses and other thing. And this is all on the after it's launched on the 29th. I don't know when this comes out, but we launch on the 29th.
Outstanding. That's really great. Keep me posted. I would love to just share things around and dig in. And happy to be a sounding board too if anything comes up.
I very much appreciate that in a million ways because you guys have, are somebody I would definitely look up to when I was starting, and I know a lot of the clinicians in this space do as well. And I would love to have you all involved in shaping this organization because you've been around a long time and know what it needs, and that's the kind of voices that we need around. So thank you for your help.
Oh, you got it. So anything else going on that we want to talk about?
I mean, I continue to put out podcast episodes, and there are two
Just
that
had a new one on ketamine, right?
I just had the one today that was released is ketamine for depression, but the entire first segment, which was about the first 50 episodes, was every psychedelic. We've got MDMA, ketamine, et cetera, all the way 5-MeO and ibogaine. We did 4 episodes. One would be a patient experience. One was a scientific research episode. Then we'd have a practitioner on, and then we'd have like a history legality episode. And again, this was aimed at doctors, and I was trying to cover any hole they could poke in psychedelics, like, oh, it's not legal, or oh, it's no research. Like, nope, we've got the researcher on, we've got the legality person covered. And once we finish that, now what I'm trying to do, because I want people to come to the Psychedelic Plant Medicine podcast and be able to use it as like a choose your own adventure. Like, I'm not interested in anything but ketamine. Great. You go to the ketamine series of episodes. But now the next series going forward is going to be more focused on conditions. So like today exactly was ketamine for depression. And last week we did psychedelics for traumatic brain injury. Because same thing, if you have a condition that you're trying to address, I want you to be able to come to the podcast and just listen to the episodes that deal with the condition that you're concerned about. So it's less like, you won't have to go through like Joe Rogan style 2 hours of like, will they talk about my condition? Like, we are only talking about your condition. They're generally like, between 30 and 50 minutes. But 2 that were really popular, and one of them that I think is really applicable, and I've heard so many good things about it. And I just wanted to promote this one, is the one that Dr. Ben Malcolm did on psychedelics and antidepressants, because there's so many people that have written in. I'm sure they write to you as well. I'm on such and such antidepressant. Can I take this psychedelic? And he went through, I asked him medicine by medicine, psychedelic by psychedelic. And then I went through the different categories of psychiatric medicines. And then he talked about, will this alter your trip? Is it contraindicated? Is it dangerous? Like, I mean, Ben is really, he's a psychiatric pharmacist and really well versed in this, and I think that is a great episode for anybody who's having those questions. And then we had James Fadman on, which was great if you have microdosing questions. I think those are probably the 2 questions I get most often, is like microdosing questions and antidepressant questions. So if you're curious, check those 2 out.
I want to bring up the 5-MeO episode.
Oh yes.
So everybody listening probably has a inkling that I've got a slight problem with the 5-MeO world, and in particular, like, is it okay to make a species go extinct to get high? I think the answer is no, and that we should back off. And you were able to kind of get that in your episode a little bit, that like even leaders that used to be more toad 5-MeO based are now like, it's probably better for now to stay away from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was really happy that you had given me, some insight into that so that I could have that conversation with them. Because again, I just left the VA about a year and a half ago. There are plenty of things that are my blind spots in this area. And so I really appreciate when people call my attention to them so that I can have that conversation with the people who are going to be on the podcast. Because I really care as to what comes out on the show, and that it's not going to cause any harm down the road in any direction, which is, it's a hard standard, like, to be sure that nothing's going to cause harm is a high bar, but let's, as physicians, we take this first do no harm oath. And so that extends to the toad. And so I'm, glad that you brought it up, and I was able to have that conversation with the guests, and they did say, there doesn't seem to be any overwhelming evidence for using actual toad versus synthetic. And so, conservation was mentioned in both of those episodes. So thank you for that. And yeah,
Oh, absolutely.
somebody just commented to me yesterday. They actually wrote in and said, I just listened to your DMT episode. He said, this could have gone so far in like I said, kind of Joe Rogan-ish, just crazy trip 2-hour directions. But the guy had done it on his own both times. And he said, and I love that you were able to kind of like distill it down and gently remind people that maybe that's not the safest way to do your first DMT trip, but without being like, without shaming him or anything, just kind of like, the little like mama bird doctor comes out and me is like, hey guys, like he did it this way, but again, disclaimer, let's try to do it the safest way possible, because it's just like, like you had mentioned earlier, it's like, we just need to keep saying this, keep safety in mind, keep these things in mind, because yeah, psychedelics can be fun and we want to do that and we want to like dive into our inner psyche and this and that. But there's always that, just, not to be afraid of them, but just have the reverence that we need to have for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's a tricky balance for sure. So one last thing before we kind of wrap here, that is a funny thing because I'm speaking at the Psilocybin Summit. This will come out probably after that, about recreational use. And it's going to be really interesting to talk about my own recreational use to this group of people who are largely only into very serious, very, very, very intentional religious use, sometimes exclusively therapeutic use. So it's going to be an interesting thing. How do I personally balance this stuff?
Right.
It's just like, I know they're powerful.
I want to tune in. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And like, yikes. It could be a bad time. It could be amazing.
You mean their talk or your psychedelic journey?
Oh, probably all of it. Yeah.
Well, I'm really excited to hear your talk, because that's, you, like you said, you've done a few of the drugs and you've spoken with people on the very opposite end. And it all just boils down to safety. Like, am I saying nobody should ever do psychedelics by themselves? I wouldn't say that. Would I want to do a heroic dose of something for the first time by myself? I would not. So it's just kind of like knowing your own edges, having your safety net built in. Like, do I have a person I can call? I swear to you, somebody I met in the Cayman Islands for one day and happened to have my number called me during a bad experience. And I was so glad that he did, because he's like, you're the only person I knew that I could safely mention this to. We talked through it. He got better. Like, have that person on speed dial if you're going to do this. Just little things like that. Be conscientious, have a good time, but have a good time.
Basics of harm reduction.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, and there's a lot of those. So,
yeah, true.
And plug another free class that we've got, 8 common psychedelic mistakes. No, that'll like mitigate some of those risks. Not all of them, but at least 8 big ones.
Right. I like that. I mean, that's, you can't drive down the road and mitigate all risks, right? But like, if we can mitigate the risk that we can mitigate, let's do that. So I appreciate that you guys have that course out.
Thanks. So, Lynn Marie, let's give folks your websites. So, Psychedelic Medicine Association to start.
Yes, psychedelicmedicineassociation.org. We're also on Twitter at psychedelic_med. And then if you want to listen to the Plant Medicine Podcast, it's on all your podcast places, but that can be found on the web at plantmedicine.org. or on Instagram at plantmedicine.org. And you can find both of these on Facebook as well. And like I said, if you're a practitioner, or we even have a spot on psychedelicmedicineassociation.org for, if you want to come in as an organization or a corporation, please sign up there. Like, we just want to build this big community that helps move this forward. And we'd love to have you join.
All right. Well, Lynn Marie Morski, thank you very much for being here, and hope it's not so long till we get to talk next.
I very much feel the same. Thank you so much for having me, Joe.
All right, there you have it. Lynn Marie Morski, Plant Medicine Podcast, Psychedelic Medicine Association. Please check her out, support her work. It's amazing, and just really happy to see that more folks are coming on and more progress is being made. So thanks, Lynn Marie, for coming on, and I hope y'all enjoyed it. So again, if you want to support us, come check out some of our free classes over at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. Leave us a review on Facebook or your favorite podcasting app, and tell a friend about the show. We always appreciate references like that. And If you want to get in touch with us, you can hit us up at psychedelicstoday@gmail.com. And yeah, we'd love to hear from you. So I hope you all enjoyed the show and you have a great rest of your day. This is Joe Moore signing off from Psychedelics Today from Breckenridge, Colorado. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.